Do you think that's because you're John Lennon's son? Like, there's a burden that is very unique to you.
I certainly recognize that there's walls up. Yeah. Without question.
For generations, John Lennon has been praised as the founder of the Beatles and as a cultural voice whose influence shaped music and activism. And for decades, the entertainment world has continued to mourn his death.
The only person I wish I had met was John Lennon, because he's the one that I did idolize, and I just thought he was just a very beautiful human being.
But at 62, his son, Julian Lennon, is no longer willing to protect an image he believes was never fully honest. This is not a celebration, but a reckoning. Julian exposes a reality long buried beneath myth.
There was a great deal of anger there, but there's also, I've grown up a lot, and there's been forgiveness since then.
The eternal resentment of Lennon. While millions of fans continue to mourn John Lennon, his son Julian has never shared that public grief in the same way. Instead, his feelings toward his father were shaped by resentment. And when Julian later chose to speak openly about it, many fans were taken by surprise. On the 20th anniversary of John Lennon's death, Julian released a public statement about his relationship with his father, making it clear from the outset that he did not believe he was the right person to explain John Lennon's life. For years, people had approached him for insight into his father and the Beatles, yet he felt that expectation was misplaced, believing that devoted fans often knew far more about John's life and work than he did. Julian explained that he lived with his father for only a short time after his birth, and that contact became rare soon after. Before John Lennon was killed, Julian had seen him only a handful of times, leaving him with little understanding of who his father truly was beyond his public image. He acknowledged the power of John's music and the achievements shared with Paul, George, and Ringo, but said the work offered no real window into John's private life or personal feelings. He described his emotions as a mix of love and anger, much like many father and son relationships, except that his unfolded under constant public attention. Julian questioned the gap between John Lennon's public message of peace and love and the absence of that same care in his own childhood, and he expressed frustration toward Yoko Ono, suggesting her presence intensified his feeling of being pushed aside. Julian also admitted that he avoided revisiting every detail of their strained relationship, partly because so much bitterness already surrounded it. One of the most painful ideas he carried was the belief that his father had once seen his conception as a mistake, a thought that stayed with him long after John Lennon was gone. Before revealing how Julian came to resent his father and stepmother that much, let's return to the beginning and trace how everything first took shape. The complicated start. Julian's parents, John Lennon and Cynthia Powell, first met in 1957 while Cynthia was studying at the Liverpool College of Art. Even though she was already engaged, their connection formed quickly, driven by John's bold, unfiltered personality and sharp confidence. That early attraction pulled Cynthia in and set the tone for a relationship that moved fast and carried a vigorous intensity from the very beginning. They began dating, and as John's rise with the Beatles accelerated, their private life grew more complicated rather than more stable. In 1962, after Cynthia became pregnant with Julian, the couple married. But the union was far from the romantic ideal many later imagined. Behind the scenes, John struggled to control his emotions, and his behavior toward Cynthia was often volatile and damaging, creating an environment marked by tension and fear rather than security. Back when Beatlemania was at its height, John and Cynthia were advised to hide their marriage from the public. Management feared that revealing it would harm John's carefully crafted image and distance him from devoted fans. So as John's fame expanded worldwide, Cynthia remained largely invisible, isolated from the spotlight that surrounded her husband. As the band evolved creatively, John's personal life shifted in ways Cynthia found unsettling. Around this time, he began using LSD, which Cynthia believed profoundly altered his personality, making him more distant and emotionally unreachable. She felt as though he was slipping into a separate reality, deepening the strain already present in their marriage. Years later, John openly acknowledged that his behavior during this period included cruelty and physical aggression, a realization he said only came with age and self-reflection. He later linked this awakening to his relationship with the new woman whom he had just met, Yoko Ono. In 1966, John met Yoko Ono, an avant-garde artist, at a London art gallery. an encounter that would quietly reshape his future. What began as a creative connection gradually grew into something more personal, signaling a turning point that Cynthia would not fully grasp until much later. By 1968, Cynthia's unease had deepened as Yoko began calling often and visiting their home more and more frequently, without regard for whether Cynthia felt comfortable welcoming her. When Cynthia confronted John about these visits, he dismissed her concerns and insisted that Yoko's presence was strictly related to artistic fundraising efforts. Despite his reassurances, the atmosphere in the home continued to shift, and Cynthia's sense that something was wrong only grew stronger. Her fears were confirmed in May 1968 while she was away on holiday, when John invited Yoko into the home they shared. That night, John and Yoko recorded Two Virgins, an album that later gained notoriety for its explicit cover. And as night gave way to morning, it became clear to John that he had to choose between his past life with Cynthia and his future with his new flame. When Cynthia returned home, she encountered a scene that left no room for doubt. Yoko was inside the house, dressed in Cynthia's bathrobe and calmly sharing tea with John, as though nothing were out of place. John's response to Cynthia's shock was casual and dismissive, offering no explanation or remorse. Overwhelmed and deeply hurt, Cynthia left the house and stayed with friends, trying to process what had just unfolded. That moment alone was devastating, but the situation soon became even more complicated. Alexis Martis, known as Magic Alex, a Beatles associate and engineer, later claimed that he spent the night with Cynthia after she walked out, a claim that would soon be weaponized against her. Weeks later, Martis told Cynthia that John intended to divorce her and seek custody of Julian, alleging that her supposed infidelity justified his actions. Although John initially supported this version of events, he ultimately agreed to allow Cynthia to file for divorce on the same grounds. The marriage ended with an out-of-court settlement that granted Cynthia £100,000, a small annual payment, and full custody of Julian, closing one chapter while quietly setting the stage for many unresolved wounds still to come. Losing a father. Before his parents separated, Julian shared a close, attentive bond with his father, and John remained aware of nearly everything in his son's daily life, despite constant demands on his time. Julian even left a creative imprint on his father's work. He inspired Lucy in the Sky with diamonds after bringing home a nursery school watercolor depicting his friend Lucy O'Donnell surrounded by stars. He also inspired Good Night, the gentle lullaby that closed the Beatles' White Album. In 1967, at just 4 years old, Julian visited the set of Magical Mystery Tour. However, Julian's perfect world crumbled the following year, and what happened reshaped his childhood in lasting ways. In 1968, when he was 5, his parents divorced as John's relationship with Yoko Ono became public. 1 year later, John married Ono and eventually welcomed a second son, Sean, while Julian remained on the outside at a stage in life when stability and reassurance mattered most. The shift was sudden and deeply personal, and Julian felt the loss long before he could fully understand it. When John left the family home, Julian lost regular contact with his father almost immediately, creating an emotional void that never fully closed. Cynthia was left to shoulder both parental roles, protecting her son while managing the lasting impact of abandonment. Their life together was modest and practical, far removed from the wealth people assumed came with the Lennon name. School offered no escape. Classmates believed Julian lived a privileged life and responded with resentment based on that misconception. The assumption turned cruel, leading to ridicule, bullying, and physical confrontations. His surname drew attention but offered no protection, leaving him isolated and misunderstood. For long periods, Julian and John barely communicated. When they did, the interactions felt distant and strained, never forming a stable relationship. John was focused on his life with Yoko and later devoted himself to raising Sean, eventually stepping away from music to concentrate on fatherhood. While the public admired this decision, Julian experienced it as a painful reminder of what he had never been given. The imbalance between the two sons became impossible to ignore. Julian later spoke about how deeply it affected him, particularly a remark attributed to John suggesting that Julian was conceived during a drunken mistake. At the same time, Sean was born out of love. Whether the wording was exact or not, the meaning endured. There was, however, a brief period when that distance narrowed. In the mid-1970s, during a temporary separation from Yoko, John's partner at the time, May Pang, encouraged him to reconnect with Julian. For a short while, they spent real time together, sharing music, laughter, and ordinary moments that had long been missing. Those experiences offered Julian a glimpse of what a steady father-son bond might have looked like. John encouraged Julian's interest in music during this time, giving him a Gibson Les Paul guitar and a drum machine for Christmas in 1973. Years later, he would describe that period as the happiest time he had ever shared with his father. However, that fragile connection ended when John returned to Yoko, and communication faded once again into silence. By the time Julian reached his mid-teens, faint signs of reconnection began to appear again. John occasionally called from New York, and during one conversation, he played a new song over the phone, Just Like Starting Over. Julian could hear renewed energy and optimism in his father's voice, and for the first time in years, the future felt uncertain in a hopeful way, as though there might still be time to repair what had been broken. Tragically, that sense of possibility ended abruptly. Julian was staying with his mother in Ruthin after returning from boarding school, quietly looking forward to a visit from his father. Instead, moments later, he was told a truth that would alter his life forever. His father was gone. John Lennon had been shot outside his Manhattan apartment building. Earlier that day, he had signed an album for Mark David Chapman, who later waited for him and fired several shots as John returned home. He was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, where he was pronounced dead shortly afterward. The news spread worldwide almost instantly. Millions mourned, gatherings formed overnight, and silence fell as people struggled to grasp the sudden loss of a cultural icon. Yoko Ono announced there would be no funeral, requesting that John's memory be honored by promoting peace rather than through a ceremony. In the years that followed, Julian began opening up about the family dynamics that unfolded behind the scenes. Speaking to the Daily Telegraph, Julian said that he had spent far less time with his father than others in John's life. He also noted that he shared a warmer, more consistent bond with Paul McCartney than he ever had with John. As he grew older, Julian became increasingly frustrated with the public celebration of John's image. From his perspective, John spoke passionately about unity while failing to live those values within his own family. He also drew a sharp contrast between his parents. Julian saw his mother, Cynthia, as someone who demonstrated love through consistent presence and action. John, in contrast, expressed love through words and music, but rarely in ways Julian could feel. He believed some of his own darker traits came from his father, and whenever he noticed aggression or anger in himself, he immediately tried to calm himself. That conscious choice became his way of breaking the cycle and refusing to repeat the emotional patterns that had shaped his childhood. In a revealing 2011 interview, Julian admitted that he had no intention of having a child, citing the trauma he experienced growing up with his father as the reason. 9 years later, in 2020, he legally changed his name from John Charles Julian Lennon to Julian Charles John Lennon, choosing the order he preferred so that the world would remember him by the name he wanted. Despite his strained relationship with his father, Julian has said he resolved many issues long ago and no longer carries negativity toward John. His latest album, Jude, blends new material with songs he wrote over 30 years ago, rediscovered among old demos. Although he had previously stated that his 2011 album Everything Changes would be his last, the rediscovery of these demos, along with encouragement from BMG CEO Hartwig Massich, motivated him to continue recording. Julian considers Jude some of the best work he has ever done. Throughout the process, he explored the meaning of peace in his life, confronting past struggles while affirming his accomplishments and creative achievements. The album serves both as a celebration of his personal journey and as a statement of independence. Even so, the deep resentment Julian once felt toward his father pales in comparison to his feelings toward Yoko Ono. Home Wrecker. After John's sudden death, Julian confronted a new and profound kind of grief, one that went beyond loss and fame. When the will was read, the reality was stark. Yoko Ono received control of everything, including an estate valued at over £200 million. In comparison, Julian was left with only a modest trust fund of £100,000. The figure was minuscule compared to the vast wealth generated by the Beatles' catalog, John's solo work, and decades of royalties. Watching everything pass to others while he received so little intensified wounds from a childhood already defined by absence and distance, Yoko, acting as executor of the estate, also kept John's personal belongings out of Julian's reach, reinforcing a sense of separation that had begun decades earlier. Determined to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his, Julian pursued legal action against the estate, a battle that stretched nearly 2 decades. The fight concluded in 1996 with a settlement reportedly worth £20 million, authorized by Yoko. It was a hard-fought victory, but the process was exhausting and emotionally draining. To outsiders, the struggle may have seemed like a pursuit of money, yet for Julian it was far more personal. He sought letters, instruments, and other items that carried his father's memory, fragments of a relationship that had always been complicated and incomplete. The negotiations were tense, and the emotional toll was heavy, yet Julian persisted, determined to reclaim a tangible connection to John and to his own past. Since then, Julian has maintained a careful and respectful relationship with Yoko Ono. He has described himself as his mother's son, a loyalty that Ono says made it difficult for her to get close to him. Despite this, she and Sean attended the opening of Julian's photo exhibition at the Morrison Hotel in New York City in 2010, appearing alongside Cynthia and Julian for photos. Ono also promoted the exhibition on her website, showing support for his work. Brothers in the shadow of Lennon. Despite growing up with vastly different experiences with their father, Julian and Sean Lennon have forged a close and genuine bond even in adulthood. In 2006, Julian attended one of Sean's performances in Paris, seeing his younger brother on stage for the first time. Witnessing Sean's talent emerge independently of their father created an immediate spark of understanding. The following year, Julian joined Sean on tour, and the shared time helped heal years of emotional separation. During that period, Julian discovered photography, opening a new avenue for creative expression. Julian's own music career had started early. At age 11, he played drums on John's album Walls and Bridges. In 1984, he released his debut album Velotte, which produced 2 top 10 hits, Velotte and Too Late for Goodbyes. However, from 1991 to 1998, he paused recording to focus on philanthropy, influenced by elders of the mourning people in Australia. As his bond with Sean strengthened, Julian became protective of his brother, a role that shaped his approach to Yoko Ono. He maintained respect and consideration, ensuring Sean's well-being while nurturing their relationship. Meanwhile, Julian's photography career expanded internationally, with exhibitions at the Morrison Hotel Gallery in New York and shows in Miami, Venice, and other cities worldwide. He also explored film and media, appearing in documentaries, providing voiceovers, and producing projects such as Whale Dreamers, a 2007 documentary about an Aboriginal tribe in Australia that screened at Cannes. In 2007, he founded the White Feather Foundation to support environmental and humanitarian causes, focusing on clean water access and highlighting humanity's responsibility to protect a finite planet. The foundation's impact was recognized in 2008 when Prince Albert II of Monaco presented the White Feather Foundation with the Better World Environmental Award. The foundation has continued to respond to crises and support communities worldwide. In 2015, following the devastating earthquake in Nepal, the White Feather Foundation contributed over $106,000 to the Music for Relief Nepal Aid Fund to assist victims. Julian has also traveled to witness projects firsthand, visiting Kenya, Ethiopia, and Colombia in 2014, to observe the White Feather Foundation's education and environmental initiatives. After his mother's death the following year, he announced that the White Feather Foundation's scholarship program would be named in her honor, the Cynthia Lennon Scholarship for Girls. Since its inception, the program has awarded over 50 scholarships to girls across Africa, the UK, and the US. Sean, too, engaged in activism, participating in and organizing the Tibetan Freedom Concerts from 1996 to 1999 in support of Tibetan independence. He also supported causes such as Occupy Wall Street in 2011 and opposed hydraulic fracking. Then, in 2012, he published an op-ed, launched Artists Against Fracking, and was joined by more than 200 artists, including Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr. Julian has also used his music and voice to support causes. In 2019, he contributed to the soundtrack of the narrative feature film One Little Finger, an initiative highlighting the potential of people with disabilities and the role of music in fostering cognitive and social development. In September 2020, his philanthropic efforts were recognized with the CC Forum Philanthropy Award in Monaco, and he was named a UNESCO Center for Peace 2020 Cross-Cultural and Peacecrafter Award laureate. A pivotal moment in 2021 strengthened the brothers' bond. Together, they watched footage of the Beatles, Get Back in London, observing John Lennon as playful, creative, and humorous in the studio. For Julian, it offered a rare chance to reconnect with a side of his father he had long lost. Experiencing it alongside Sean made the moment even more meaningful, softening old bitterness and replacing it with a gentler, reflective love. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.